DESIblitz.com.
Hello, everyone. My name is Devineni. I'll be running the workshop today. Just a reminder, the DESIblitz Festival of Literature is happening as we speak, and it'll be happening until the 25th of November. There's multiple events, and you can catch a lot of their programs on their website, which will be up on the chat. And it's a wide array of topics, from not only just comics, but books and how to get your book published, to panels on all topics that are related to both literature and being Desi. So until the 25th, catch as much as you can. I should mention during the session, we'll be taking any questions in the chat. If you want to type anything, you can. I'm not sure if there's a possibility at the end, we might have a Q&A session. I'm going to go through a lot of stuff and hopefully give as much information as possible on how to write comics. And there'll be also a focus on how to design, draw, and hopefully get your comics published. If you want to put in the chat, if you're an illustrator or a comic book writer and this is your first time learning this, or you're about to venture into this, please share any of your thoughts in the chat and I'll try to answer them as well. Again, my name is Devineni. I am the creator of a comic book series called Priya Shakti, which features India's first female comic book superhero, Priya. And as you can see from the image, she flies around on a tiger and she fights against gender-based violence, but other topics as well. So she's a part of this bigger canon of superheroes, especially female superheroes. We worked in one of our comics with actually Wonder Woman and also the Burqa Avenger in Pakistan. So we're trying, at least I'm trying, to bring Priya and her message into a broader scope of women superheroes. But I'll be talking more beyond just superhero comics to other stuff as well. Okay. So here is some of the covers of the Priya Shakti series. The second one is called Priya's Mirror, where Priya returns with her friend Sahas, who's a tiger, and she is tackling the issues of acid attacks. And in Priya and the Lost Girls, which is the one on the right, she again comes back, and this time she's focusing on sex trafficking. Some very heavy topics, I understand. So you don't need to go as heavy as this to make your comics. They can be many different forms, and I'll explain that in a bit. I'm going to show a little trailer, a teaser on how I make these comics, the process of doing it. I also use a technology called augmented reality, which makes the comic books come to life. And if there's time at the very end, I'll show some samples of that. So let me just play this here. So before I get into the actual process of writing a comic, I do want to emphasize I'm going to focus more on the writing part of it. But as you saw in the video, there are two illustrators that I work with, Sid and Netta, and that's one of the important things, of course, in creating comics is the relationship between the writer and the illustrators. In most cases, the writer and the illustrators are not the same people. If you take someone like Neil Gaiman, who wrote the series Sandman, and of course, which is on the Netflix series right now, he's a writer, and he works with other illustrators to take his ideas, his story ideas, and his scripts into comic book form. And that communication and that interaction with the illustrators is paramount. So I'll talk a little bit about how to build that relationship, and more importantly, how to create that dialogue with your illustrator to make sure the text that you write, the images in your head, transcribe into the images that are on page. So I should mention this seminar is really designed for many different audiences. So if you're a first-time comic book creator, it's totally fine. I might be speaking very general in some terms, so apologize if you have more experience and you're listening to that. So there's many different styles of comics out there. Very popular one is called manga, which comes out of Japan. And manga is usually an entire drama written and illustrated in a book. In case of Japan, the books are read from the back to the front because that's the style of how Japanese read their books. This is a style that's very popular in Japan and all over Asia, but of course, becoming hugely popular in the US. Another style that you can use if you have no illustrative experience is fumetti. As you can see, this is Star Trek. And what they did is they took film stills from Star Trek and then put voice bubbles or different bubbles, thought bubbles and narration bubbles to help tell the story. You don't have to do it with film stills. You can, of course, do it with magazine pictures and anything else, do collages, but it's still a form of comics because at the core essence of all comics, it's called sequential art, and this is sequential. There's a story being told in sequence. Another popular form of comic book style is biography comics. In this one, I'm illustrating here about a South African singer named Brenda Fassie, and she was very popular during the 70s and 80s, during apartheid in South Africa. And this comic book illustrator decided to tell her story. And I'm showing this because I'm coming back to it later on when I go through the process. Of course, superhero comics are probably the most popular ones, and everyone knows because of the huge Marvel and DC movies that are being shown and showcased all over the world. We have, of course, Miss Marvel on the left, Pakistan's superhero who is given these superpowers. She lives in Jersey City in New Jersey, the USA, and she has to deal with not only being a superhero, but being a teenage girl and a teenage girl of color. Wonder Woman, one of the first strong female superheroes that was created, is another one, of course. Now, comics can also be very simple, as you can see from this stick figure comics, and you can do it in any style you want. In this stick figure comic, you're going to see the basic story structure of not only a simple comic strip, but the style of any form of storytelling, in which literally in 3 panels, you have basically the structure of a story. Here in the beginning, you have the character being introduced in the first panel, possibly a conflict they have to deal with. And by the time the middle that conflict has come to fruition. In this case, it's how it's starting to snow, which is the big dilemma for any stick figure. And then the third one is, which makes his life interesting because now his background appears to look different than what he normally does, which is an ironic twist to it. So basically, the introduction is the character, the middle is the conflict and how the character deals with the conflict, and the third panel, or the last part of the comic, is how they would deal or not deal or resolve the issue. I'm going to use this story structure as the framework for how we do create a comic book script. And I'm going to start by first talking about a comic book that I love. It's also a graphic novel called Persepolis, which is out of it's actually out of Europe, out of France, but it's about an Iranian girl during the Iranian Revolution. Now, Persepolis is quite interesting because if you look from the cover itself, it's a very simply drawn but beautifully told story. So the story and the text is incredibly important as a style. And when you're writing a comic, you have to, of course, think about a great story. What's compelling, and when you're starting to do the process of writing it and then eventually illustrating, think about the uniform style of how you want to tell it. In the case of Persepolis, characters are defined with only a few lines, and within those few lines, the personalities come out. Within that small black and white, you can really see who this person is. And as I said previously, the first panel or first part of the book defines the character and the environment. Middle panel goes into the issues and the story, and the last panel goes into how the character will or will not deal with it. So let me give an example from Persepolis of what I'm talking about. This is actually just one page, but I've broken down into different slides to give an example of this. This one-page part of the whole graphic novel is called The Veil. And again, it's about young girls who had to deal with the Iranian Revolution, which happened at the end of the 70s or going into the 80s, and how that transformed their lives in Iran and Tehran in particular. So here, Persepolis in 1980 is in school, like all of her classmates, doing what all girls do. And then all of a sudden the revolution breaks out. And that's when she has to deal with the conflict. But before we get to the conflict, you can see this uniform style and the simplicity in the drawings. But even so, the characters are emphasized and comes out just by simple things like the hairline, the eyes, things like that. Even though they're all look alike, wearing the same burqa and so forth, you can definitely distinguish one character from another. So that's what the illustrator and the writer really was focused on, is making sure that comes out. So here we're introduced to the characters and also to Persepolis. And then in the middle panel, or the middle of the comic, you start learning about the Iranian Revolution, and you learn about all the dramatic changes that happened as a result of it. And how that affected these little girls in the school. Prior to that, they didn't have to wear hijabs or burqas or anything like that. And then all of a sudden they're given that by their teachers. Now everything is transformed in their lives. And what do little girls do when they get something which they don't completely understand? Well, you can see from this last panel what they do. They use it for jump ropes or horsey rides or whatever else. To them, they don't know what this means. It's a completely dramatic change. So this is how they're dealing with the conflict or the change. Very simple. It's all just one page long, but within that one page, you learn a lot. Not only the characters, the history, but also there is a social message that comes out of it. So let me see. I'm going to go to the chat and see if there's any questions before I go back to my slides. No questions here. Excellent. So I will continue ahead then. All right. All right. So now I'm going to focus on this one-page comic, and I'm going to actually go into the actual structure of a comic book script. So comic book scripts, there really is no standardized format for that. The important thing is you want to create a comic book script that can then be translated into a visual form. So whether you want to structure like a film script or a play or just straight text, whatever, that's really up to you. But the important thing is the visual storytelling, and it is visual storytelling, because you have to be very descriptive how you want to present it, has to be translated so that an illustrator can understand it. And I use translate in a very kind of broad way, because this translate could be literally them reading the script, or it could be just spending weeks and weeks having coffee and conversations, going to the library and going through many sources and having that dialogue with the illustrator so they understand where visually you want this to look. But also, you have to give flexibility to the illustrator. The reason why you hired a certain illustrator is because you like his or her style of drawing, and you want their personality or their style to come out and be in sync with the vision that you have in your head. So I'm going to use this example. This is a teenage girl that I did a workshop. I did a workshop in New York City, with multiple teenagers about writing their script and then drawing it. Just these one-page comics. And her name is Jade, and I'm going to use her one-page comic as an example of story structure and how to write a comic book script. So writing a comic book script, of course, you have to sort of start thinking, what will each panel tell us? How will the panels connect to the entire story? This is about uniformity. How do you go from one page to the next and have a consistency to it? If you have personal stories, those are often the best to tell, and they are also easier to turn into scripts. There's something that you can relate with and you can describe easily to the illustrator. If possible, when you're writing the script and also illustrating it, text should be reduced or used sparingly. Let the visuals tell most of the story. It's not always the case. You can see a lot of the older scripts having a lot of text. So I'm just going to stop for a second. I think a chat came in here. Unfortunately, I have to stop sharing in order to see this. Oh, okay, sorry. All right, I'm going back. Okay, let's continue. Let the visuals tell most of the story. Don't go into details. Let the reader imagine between the panels. There can be jump cuts in the story. The beautiful thing about sequential art is you can allow for big leaps in storytelling. And between those panels, that white space is sometimes where the reader can put their own imagination into what they suspect happened or didn't happen. Comic book scripts are to an extent like film scripts, storyboards in particular. There's a lot of language that is shared between these two, and you'll see that when you see this script that I wrote based on Jade's comic. So the first panel in Jade's comic, as you can see on the left, that's the visual interpretation of the actual script, which is on the right. Or on your case, it might be reversed. But anyway, you'll understand. So panel one, and this is how I kind of create my scripts. I break each panel down, and within that little structure, I then have to give a description. Here, in this case, Jade is in her bedroom into a mirror. She is displeased with her looks. Her shirt is rolled up to reveal her hairy arms. And from that text alone, the illustrator can create that representation in the artwork. Then the next thing is the captions or voice bubbles or thought bubbles, and you sort of clearly emphasize that so that they know what style to draw. In this case, I said caption when I was young, I hated my olive skins, hairy body, and big noise. So the first panel, again, sets up the character, the environment. Who is Jade? She's, of course, is a teenage girl, uncomfortable with her looks and sulking in her bedroom. And you can see that clearly, not only with her eyebrows, but her hairy arms and everything. These are personalities that are coming out. And this is actually who Jade is in real person. So panel two, here I'm using the terminology of film, point of view, and that's something that everyone can kind of understand very easily. From Jade's view, we see all these fashion magazines in the voice bubble. I wish I looked like her. And then in addition to that, there's a caption at the bottom. The middle panel goes further into the story and the problem she is dealing with in her daily life. In the case here, the unfair representation of women in the media and how she personally feels from that. And panel three, Jade is in her bedroom, the way she's holding her two fingers up, which I think is really, really cool. It tells a lot about her personality. She's starting to feel comfortable when she looks in the mirror. And she says, I had to learn how to love myself, my brown skin and hairy arms. But then in panel four, that changes all of a sudden. Her pinching her nose is something that I think is a really cool thing in her cross eyes. This again, you're really getting an understanding of her personality. She says, I still struggle accepting my nose. I wax my eyebrows, shave my legs, and try to fit in as much as possible. Here, you start to really get who this character is. And one of the things that I do sometimes with all the comics that I create is write a backstory. This again is film terminology, but a backstory of who this character is, where she grew up, who her family is, her parents, her siblings, and so on. What are her challenges? What are her struggles? What does she do on a normal day? All of these help kind of bring into light who this character is. It can be just a paragraph or a one-page backstory of who that person is. Panel 5, you start to get different fashion magazines being shown. And she says, if only people showed all races are beautiful, if only we had more representation in media. This is a want. This is something Jade wants. This is something you're going to see very typical in storytelling and in comics. What does the main character want out of life? What are the challenges and what do they hopefully want changed, or what are they going after? Now the question now becomes, the last panel is, does Jade get what she wants, and does that transform her or not? And unfortunately, it doesn't. The way she's hunkering down, holding her knees against her face, her hairy knees and hairy arms, you could see that, and it says in the caption, and thousands of girls, including me, wouldn't have hated the color of their skin. And the last panel shows the results of the conclusion of her problems. I'll let you interpret it, whether she feels happy or things have been resolved in her life, or if she's still going through that transformation. So the script, as you can see in the text, is a map of how the story is told. And I strongly emphasize writing a script. What happens quite often is people just write a one-page treatment and then they give it to the illustrator and they start working in sync with the illustrator to create their comic. I wouldn't really recommend that, because what happens is you end up wasting a lot of time with the illustrator creating those pages, which then might have to be re-edited and reinterpreted if things get wrong. And that's a lot of time wasted with the illustrator. Most comics, my comic book series, each issue is about 40 pages long, can take up to 6 months to illustrate, depending on how intricate it is. So that's a lot of time dedicated to illustrations. And if you don't have the script beforehand and you work in sync with the illustrator to create it and you have to make changes, that gets dragged on. This is time, labor-intensive work. And in most cases, in all my cases, for my series at least, I pay the illustrator per page. So going back, I have to pay extra money to make those changes. So if you have a script mapped out, this reduces the time, the labor commitment that's needed to create these pages. And then eventually, if you have to make changes, it reduces the cost of that. So let me see if there are any questions, then I will bring back the screen. No, I don't think so. So hopefully this is a good start for everyone to at least start the idea of how to visually write a comic book script. And then eventually I'm going to go into sort of how the next phase of turning that comic book script and having that communication with the illustrator, how to make it come to life. And going back to my slides. So once you have that comic book script down, one of the first things that you have is the conversation with the illustrator about the characters. And all character design is usually the first process of really imagining the characters in the text come to life. And when someone's creating character designs, what they do is they do these model sheets, and from the model sheets, they then interpret them into thumbnails. And though this could be a quite lengthy process, getting the character right. So this conversation you have with them could take, this could be 10, 15% of your time, because you have to get those characters right and the character sheets down how they look, how they are imagined in different physical stances, movement, and so forth. Once that's taken care of, then it becomes easier for the illustrator to use those character sheets as a base, as notes for the actual page illustrations. Okay, so all characters have particular shapes, and you don't have to make human characters. You can make characters from animals, from in all kinds of forms can be told. Stick figures, as I mentioned. Each character in how you design them, the shape wise, has a particular personality. When you look at simple shapes, what do you feel? If you look at a circle, you have this soft, squishy, harmless, approachable, changeable feel to it. A straight square has a solid, sturdy, strong, supportive, reliable, inflexible emotion. A triangle has the shape of direction, dynamic, dangerous, unpredictable, a lot of movement. These are some of the character designs and the thumbnails of those characters that were created. And you can start seeing those shapes in there. For instance, the one here, the guy holding his arms like that can be interpreted from the square image. These are kind of almost like emotional shapes that help you then create those characters. And then from these thumbnails, you then get inks and the actual characters themselves. Through the coloring, of course, they become much more lively and gain those personalities. Okay. Once you have those characters down, what you do is you then sit down with the illustrator, I mean, it can be remotely, of course, and start creating these thumbnails or drafts. In most cases, they're in pencils. Nowadays, most of these are all in computer rendered, but I'm using the more basic one of drawing them in pencils. From these pencils, you start getting the thumbnails or the pages down. They don't get detailed or super detailed because what happens is once you get all these thumbnails down, as the writer, or in some cases you might hire an editor, they would look at these thumbnails and figure out, well, is the story understandable? Does it make sense from one page to another, from one panel to another? Is there continuity? Is there understanding of what was being told? What's missing? What's not missing? And when you do it in pencils, you can easily fix those problems. Thumbnails doesn't require a large amount of commitment or changes from the illustrator. That's why they do it initially from that stage. From the pencils, the illustrator, once everything is locked down, they start inking it. They start turning those into darker, more defined lines, also giving space on the comic book page to where eventually the text and the voice or thought bubbles would go. All right, and then from there, here's another example of inking. Some more detailed inking. As you can see from here, the blue is, so this, of course, this person designed everything on the computer, not on paper. So initially they designed everything in this color blue, light blue, that's the pencil marks, the thumbnails. And from there, once everything's confirmed, they start then detailing everything in inking or dark, more bold lines. And you can clearly see from the page that they're designing that there's space to where the dialogue would be. So not everyone is flushed in the middle or anywhere else, or if they are flushed in the middle, there's space above them or to their right to give space to where the voice bubbles or text bubbles will be. And then once everything is defined in the inking and everything's approved, then they would then go to the coloring process. In some cases, the illustrator is not always the colorist. Sometimes someone else is hired to do the coloring. In my case, I work with Sid, and who does the inking and the design, the comic book design, and then Netta, she does all the coloring of the comics. Two different people, but they work in collaboration with each other. And the coloring itself can be very vibrant. It can be dark and cinematic. It's so many different things you can play around with. And you can see here her personalities come out because of the colors. And another example based upon the one I showed previously of the coloring, here you can see how even though the coloring here is probably much more sharper and much more simple, it's still very diverse. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my other comic book series, Jupiter Invincible, which is about an enslaved African American during the American Civil War who's given these supernatural powers of invincibility. And here I'm showing the character design of who Jupiter is. Initially, the blue lines are there to create the basic outline of who this character is, and then the coloring is then put in. And I'm going to show you a lookbook that I created, which was very helpful for the illustrator in helping to define who Jupiter and the environment that he lives in. Because the environment he lives in is based on history, American history. So there's a lot of stuff that I can use, and I'm going to show an example of that shortly. So the character Sid, who also illustrated this, took Jupiter and put him in different personalities, faces, and also was really emphasized the color palette because he is African American. So it's very critical to really focus on his color of his skin, the color of his clothes, and everything else. So let me share the lookbook. And this is what I do with every new comic book series that I create, is I create this extensive, it's a PDF, or it can be slides or whatever you like, something that the illustrator can use to understand visually who these characters are and the environment that they live in. So let me just bring this up and it'll give you a very clear idea of what I'm talking about. All right, so what you should be seeing on your screen is a PDF. And this is a PDF of Jupiter Invincible. And I use a lot of historical photos to help me kind of interpret who this character is. And he was then able to use those photos to create these character designs for them. And these characters designs, for example, are based on photos that I found online. And it goes so intricate that I was looking up clothing and textures and things like that. So all of these, I create this PDF and I hand it to my illustrator, and they use that to interpret it on creating the characters. So in my case, there's a lot of actual real people that I was able to use, and that was very helpful knowing they had photos available. I'm just going to quickly go through. So even as intricate as the pegged leg, I had to kind of research and find out what are some historical stuff that can be taken. The environments, so I had a lot of Civil War photos that I could use. Environments and architecture of Philadelphia in the 1860s and 1870s. So there's, as you can see, it was quite extensive, from landscape, paintings, photos, Civil War photos, faces and clothes. These were all very useful for the illustrator in creating the comic book series. Okay, let me bring back. So the lookbook is something that, in the case of Jupiter Invincible, it took me several weeks to research and find, because not everything is available online. I had to go to the public library in New York and in DC and other places and research through those libraries. In some cases, I actually went to Virginia and Maryland, the states where this story takes place, and took photos of the landscape and environment, and that helped the illustrator kind of figure out where this character resides. And the U.S. is very diverse and eclectic, so there's different. If you just go from New York down to Virginia or to Florida, the landscape changes continuously. So it's very important to showcase that. All right. So here's the covers of Jupiter Invincible based on the research. As you saw from my lookbook, the first page of the lookbook, I was focusing on how I want the cover to design. And I found some famous paintings, and with those famous paintings, the illustrator was then able to interpret them and create the covers for that. All right. So I'm going to go into a little bit about creating your own superheroes. And this is going to be leading to a homework assignment. that you'd be able to take home with you and hopefully start your process of writing the script. Obviously, superheroes are one of the most popular forms of comic books out there, and creating that superhero is not only it's a lot of fun, but a challenge, because the big question is, how do you make your superhero different or unique? Because in most cases, a lot of people just seem to be repurposing old motifs or old characters and just bringing them forward. You don't need to have a superhero with supernatural powers. These are things you have to sort of ask yourself. So when you create a superhero, you should imagine them as a silhouette. Can you name? I mean, just looking at these superheroes, these are all DC superheroes. You can look at those silhouettes and easily figure out who they are. And it should be that simple when you create your superhero. Um, like obviously there's Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Batman, Aquaman, and a few others. Um, those silhouettes really kind of bring them out. In my case, the Priya Shakti series, the idea of having a female superhero who's Indian on a flying tiger comes very much from Indian mythology. It's a reimagination of the Hindu mythological stories, and in particular, the story of, I mean, a lot of the female goddesses were played into this. And I didn't take one particular goddess, but I took many different ones, including the goddess Parvati and others. And they played into the creating Priya. There's other very popular mythologies or origin stories. Batman, of course, seems to be coming out. That story seems to be being retold every couple of years and coming out as a new form, not only as a movie but as a book or a comic book or an animated series. It's never ending, that origin story. In most cases, most origin stories for superheroes come from tragedy. Now, in the case of Priya, she is a gang rape survivor, and through what happened to her and the transformation that she goes through lends very much into who she becomes and the personality or the powers she then gains from that tragedy. In the case of Batman, of course, what happened to the death of his parents by a burglar or a thief leads him on this journey of transforming himself and how he can come back as Batman to instill fear and hope in Gotham City. Now, probably the most often used structure in superhero story structure, and in I guess in general in stories telling in general, is the hero's journey, and it comes from a very popular writer, educator, Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Many of you know he eventually, this book and what he wrote became the inspiration for Star Wars, the Star Wars series, in particular the first Star Wars in the late 70s. Now, what Joseph Campbell did is he researched mythologies all over the world and found very common structures or journeys that characters go through in ancient mythologies, in ancient stories, and how they can be then reinterpreted to modern stories, and how one can use that to help tell not only stories, but your own personal journey. So if you look at this diagram here, all superheroes start off with a call to adventure. And through that, they go through this journey, this circular journey, where they might then have to face supernatural. They're given supernatural skills, or in some cases a sword or a shield that has supernatural powers, and then they use that on that journey. And then they get to a point where they're then being challenged, and here they're challenged not only from something that could be as typical as a villain or a conflict. It could be even their own personal challenges as well. Now, in the case of Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, of course, is then mentored through this challenge by a wise Obi-Wan Kenobi or whoever else. This is a very typical thing you see is the challenge or the mentor or the stronger knight or the stronger hero or anti-hero then educates our hero in these skills or how to use these supernatural powers to go to the next level. And then at a certain point, once they have those skills, they're tempted, or there's a revelation that happens. It's usually monumental in where their belief structure is challenged or is put to the test, and they have to then figure out, based on what they learned from the mentor or the previous experiences, what to do. And it is through this revelation that almost a rebirth or the character transforms into something else. If you look at, for example, Batman, of course, after his parents dies, goes into the abyss, trains himself, comes back as a completely transformed person, and now is become the Batman. And the Batman is then put to the test, and his values are put to the test. And through this transformation leads to atonement. And that's hopefully at that point, the superhero has overcome those challenges and has then used all this long journey that they've gone to and then conveyed that or brought that back to their community, to Gotham City or whatever else. And from there, it's the return. And in most cases, it's the return back to where they started. Batman, of course, coming back to Gotham City. In my case, my character Priya, who's a rape survivor who's given those supernatural powers, returns back to the community that threw her out. And through what she learned, she then transforms the community. This is a more intricate, and you can find this online, of the hero's journey, and it goes more precise, almost like plot points of where this circular story diagram can be used in your own comic book script. I won't go into details on this, but just to give you a more detailed interpretation of the previous one. So superpowers, these are the big things that define who a superhero is. Superhero, of course, superhero, if you use the word superhero, you automatically assume they have superpowers. But I always go with the idea, superheroes, maybe you should define why they should not use their superpowers. It's too easy to put situations where they can use their superpowers, but why not put them in situations where they have to then decide whether or not to use it or not? So give like 3 reasons not to use them. And this becomes sort of the character Bible or the backstory of who this character is. In my case, Priya, her power is the power of motivation. She, of course, flies around on a magical tiger, which in itself is a superpower, but her power is the power of persuasion. So this little quote here, which I love, everyone probably remembers it from Spider-Man: "With great power comes great responsibility." In Priya's case, she never forces anyone to do anything. She persuades, and that is her core value. Again, if you're using the superhero genre, often superheroes defined by the villains, because these villains attack the superheroes' values and their weaknesses. In most cases, the villains are the polar opposite of who the superhero is. They're the counter character. And I always say you should write the backstories for the villains as you would do the backstory for your own characters, your own superheroes. Obviously, these two are the probably most famous villains: Lex Luthor, Superman's archenemy, and the Joker, Batman's archenemy. Superheroes, of course, are huge, not only making, seems like, trillions of dollars at the box office, they're also something that a lot of people want to believe or live. So why do people identify with superheroes? Because superheroes create a mythology. and this mythology becomes a part of society. So when you do create your characters, think responsibly how they should be brought into the real world, because you can obviously see your superheroes can be brought into the real world through crossplay and other things. So an assignment for everyone, if you want to do a comic book with superheroes, these are some things that I would recommend when you create your backstory. Of course, the name, what is the origin of the story of the character, write that backstory. What tragedy transformed them? How did they get their superpowers? What is their superpower? It doesn't, usually it's best to keep it to one or two. If someone, I mean, I love Superman, but I'm never a huge fan of Superman because he seems to have everything. And there has to be a level of weakness that a character has. Three reasons not to use it, and then who is the nemesis, the villain. So if you're gonna use this genre, this is sort of where I would recommend starting off with just writing a one-page backstory treatment of the character. And there's my character, Priya. She's also transformed a lot from the different illustrators who worked on it. And she continues to come out in many comic book forms. We're doing other comics based on her story in other countries now. And we just released one in South America, in Colombia. And we'll be doing more. And I think a future one in China is coming out as well. Well, let me quickly show some AR stuff or talk a little bit about augmented reality, and then I'll close this session. And I appreciate everyone being on. And I should mention, as I said in the beginning, DESIblitz will be having more events all the way to the very end. So if you want to check out more of their programs or some of the other speakers, please check out their website. And actually, someone's saying Parva has a question. It's in the Q&A box. Any books you recommend? Okay. So there are the question is books to recommend for writing comics. There are a couple that I would recommend. I'm trying to remember who they. I put them in the chat. But there's a great book called How to Write Comics, and how to write digital comics. If you Google search that or put it up on Amazon, it's really interesting because it's actually designed like a comic book. So you see the process from the interpretation of a comic book, and I would recommend that if you want to start at the very basic level of doing it. There are, I always say for comic books, the best thing to do is to check out some of the favorite ones you read. Anything that Neil Gaiman writes is brilliant. Sandman or any of the other series, I would recommend checking out of his work. And Neil Gaiman, I think, does a lot of stuff. He has a lot of videos on YouTube where he talks about the process of writing and interpreting comics. So he's a great useful help for anyone starting off. Let's see, someone has Understanding Comics is one book I recommend. It says Caro W. Yeah, there's so many. Yes, Understanding. That's actually it. Scott McCloud, who wrote the book Understanding Comics. That's the one I was thinking of. I recommend. It's hugely popular, and a lot of people getting into it really love that book. So check that out if you can. And I think it's also available as an ebook, so you can read it on your devices too. And I should mention, this right now, I think more than ever, it really is actually Parva, Scott McCloud. Yes, that's correct. So right now, more than ever, I think it's like a renaissance for comics, partially because of all the superhero movies, but the distribution has really opened up for people. Many people get into comic book industry by publishing online, publishing on Instagram, or another popular format is webtoons. And from there, they try then to equate that into some kind of book contract or something else. But they build the audience from that, and from there they can really move forward in doing other things. Whether you're an illustrator or a writer, it's a really a renaissance of diversity of comics as well. So many people of color making comics in multiple languages all over the world are coming out. It's quite an amazing time for that. Before, you had to have a deal with a book publisher in order to get a small printed comic out, and there was very few bookstores that carried them. But now you can sort of go around that and do it yourself and get noticed. Well, I think I might close. Only 5 more minutes left. I might start closing it out. I want to thank everyone for being a part of this, and hopefully I at least got the process started for everyone. This is not the final process for getting your book and writing your script, but at least it starts you on this journey. And it is a fun journey, and it's really a lot of fun when you're working with an illustrator or with a team of people, and seeing the visual ideas in your head coming to life. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, DESIblitz. Again, check out their websites for more stuff, more literary events. The festival is continuing until the 25th. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening or a good day, depending where you are.